Man, 2020 was something else, wasn't it, Brynn?
Yeah.
I think that displays everything beautifully. Yeah. Well, guys, we're happy to be back for season 2 of Soul Coaching, where we want to focus on the theme of expansion. 2020 was a rough year for a lot of people, and there was a lot going on. There was awakening, there was remembrance, there was healing of trauma. But what happens in the spiritual path when you get past that? Well, it's time for expansion in this phase. And so in season 2, we want to focus on topics that kind of embody or focus on this idea of expanding. We've thrown away some of the detritus, we've gotten rid of some of the garbage, and now it's time to see what we can do with this new creative power.
In season 2 of Soul Coaching, we hope to help you guys expand into the fullest, most authentic versions of yourselves, while also giving you practical tools to help you embody all that you have learned thus far.
It's going to be a great season, guys. As usual, I'm your host, Christopher Lee, joined by my wonderful co-host, Brynn McCalester. And in season 2, it's going to be all about expansion. We want to remind you that we are now on Hermit Radio, a subsidiary of LifeGrove, and we are looking forward to an incredible season. Let's get going. Everybody, welcome back to Soul Coaching Season 2. 2? Dos? What?
What are you going for there? Oh.
Season 2? Season 2? Season dos? Season 2, everybody. So we're talking today, I think. Well, let's start that over. God, we're talking about knocking the rust off here.
Oh my God.
I didn't even introduce us.
I mean, I don't think our listeners would be surprised, but...
Okay. Zen. Zen. If you just say Zen, then you become Zen, right? That's how it works?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Uh-huh. I'm your host, Soul Coach Christopher Lee, and I am joined with my brilliant co-host, Brynn McCalester, Reiki Master Extraordinaire. Brynn, how are you today?
I'm fantastic. Super excited to be kicking off season 2 and being back at it again after the holidays.
Right. We drug our feet, and now we're back, guys. So don't worry. We're going to be much more consistent this year. We think, we promise, we hope. It's all up to kids. You know, these kids, they sap our energy. They steal our time. Anyways, before I go off the rails.
You hear my kid, and they decide when we can record episodes in quiet.
Right. Well, and as our listeners do know, we are kid friendly here at Soul Coaching, and just a quick intro. Our podcast is now being hosted through Hermit Radio, which is a subsidiary of my company, LifeGrove, which is a spiritual growth community focused on helping people navigate the spiritual experience, navigate awakening. And this season, we're going to be talking a lot about expansion. Brynn and I talked briefly before planning the episodes for this season about this great awakening that occurred in 2020 and how many people kind of had the illusory veil pulled up a little bit and were allowed to see things a little bit more clearly. But as many of us who have been walking the spiritual path for many years know, the awakening, the first pulling back of the veil, is only one piece of the puzzle, and it usually leads to something like a dark night of the soul, a very troubling time where things are being shaken up and stirred about. And then once that's done, which I think a lot of people have gone through, there's a time for expansion, for growth, for understanding something new. And so this season, we're going to be talking a lot about those sorts of topics. And I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Brynn, before I bring up the topic I have for us to talk about today.
Yeah, well, and I feel like 2020, there was so much awakening that happened as a collective. And I know, when I was awakening, that can feel really overwhelming and confusing, and you may not know where to even start in that journey. And so that's kind of why we got to talking about expansion. And I firmly believe that everything is a part of us. And so in this season, we really just want to kind of like explore different topics and explore different modalities, and help you guys kind of navigate different ways that you may be able to expand into your full, true, and authentic self, and just kind of find your niche in it all.
Wonderfully said. There is so much to it. And once you start exploring, once you start expanding, then it's like one question leads to 12 questions, leads to 42 more questions.
Totally.
And it can be very difficult to navigate, particularly if you don't have any guides, whether those be spiritual guides or physical, personal guides in your life. So, we want to focus this season around this concept of expansion, give you some ideas into some different modalities, different paths that you can take to understand what may have happened for you in 2020, as well as for everybody else who's been walking the path for a little bit longer. Some deeper elements. So the show structure will change a little bit. We'll have a couple of pieces. In fact, I wish I had my notes up here. What we talked about the other day, that would have been a good idea, right? But
Yeah.
even with changing show format, we're still going to have the same silliness that we had in our first season. So I remember we talked about. Ooh, maybe we'll do some divination today.
Well, and I think it's cool too, because as you start to navigate different modalities, as you start to look into different things or hear about different things, you will have like the entire universe resides within you. And so there's going to be certain things that just resonate more deeply with you. There's going to be things that call to you. And so as we go on this journey in season 2, I really encourage you guys to, like, if something intrigues you, look into it, start digging deeper into the things that feel good in your body and really like spark something within you. And I always like just using the term like remembering, like as you start to walk down the spiritual path, you have moments of like aha moments, or remembering like where your soul came from and what you're here to do.
Absolutely. And it's, it's not always a solo path too. I try to remind people of that. For me, it has definitely been a solo practitioner path with very little, especially in the beginning, the first 4 or 5 years after my big awakening and the dark night of the soul that occurred. It was very solo, a lot of reading books, trying to figure things out the hard way. And I try to let people know that you don't have to do that, right? There are spaces now, safe spaces where you can talk about these things. So, in addition to all the different topics we'll be talking about here, I want to invite everybody to join us on the LifeGrove application. You can join the community on your phone. It's a lot like social media, just without all the BS. And what we talk about there is a multitude of things, from yoga to Reiki to Western esoteric stuff, Eastern esoteric stuff. So if there's something that does pique your interest, chances are we have somebody talking about it in this space at www.grovesocial.org. So I've got a couple of cards. I don't want to pull them yet. This one is the Mystic Shaman deck. So maybe we'll pull something from that later. But as for the topic, I came across something today that really kind of irked me. And I came across it at a couple of different spaces while I was doom scrolling. I used that right?
I like
I'm getting
that.
getting so old, I don't know what's hip anymore, but I've heard of this concept of doom scrolling, which is kind of like what people did before, which was, I'm going to scroll until I find something that pisses me off, right? Something that triggers me. So this is what triggered me, this post here. And I wrote a little piece about it on the LifeGrove app, but I'm going to bring up some of this in this talk here. It says, it's got a little like eye of Ra. And it says, people claim to be spiritual, but can't see the spiritual war going on right now. Now, this wasn't the only post about spiritual warfare that I saw. I saw it from different perspectives, from like 5D super spiritual, 10th dimension shaman pages. I saw it from Christianity pages. I saw it from fundamentalist pages and people. I saw it from people who were coming at it from a place of Reiki or yoga, this idea of spiritual warfare. And it was this concept that, really bugged me. And I wasn't sure why, so I sat with it for a moment. And I thought, I asked Spirit to guide me on this, and the answer was really direct. It was quite clear. And Spirit told me this idea of spiritual war is a fabrication. And it's a fabrication of the egoic mind. And so what I wrote about this, and I'll read this off really quickly. This fabrication of the egoic mind utilizes a subversive mental virus to block us from pure spirit or pure awareness. Spirit has no need for war, for conflict, and needs no warriors and no evangelism. There is no need to fight for spirituality and no need to declare war on the worldview of another person. This is a perverted truth that makes the spiritual aspirant believe that their knowledge or insight carries more value than that of another, thus creating more division between self and other, reinforcing this idea of separation. Spirit, which is infinite and beyond division, and as such, cannot war with itself. The only conflict that exists is that which is inside our own being, between the illusion of egoic separation and infinite spirit. It does not extend to our relationship with other people. This so-called war is not fought through the intellect or the acquisition of knowledge. It is dissolved by laying down our weapons and removing the armor the ego has developed. It is resolved through surrender, not conquest. To engage with the infinite, to remember our origin, and to relinquish the tyranny of ego, that is the path of spirit. So I wanted to bring that up and ask you, Brynn, what are your thoughts? Do you believe in this concept of spiritual war or a spiritual warfare that is happening amongst us as people here in the year 2021?
I love this topic, and this is something like I've thought a lot about, and I think it's so interesting, and I totally see people on the extreme sides of both sides, and it just like baffles me. I'm a firm believer that like we all come from the same energy. So yes, there's good and yes, there's bad, but by the time bad is expressing itself, it's already working on coming to the light. And so if we're saying you're bad and I'm right, and you're wrong and I'm right, then we're constantly feeding into our egoic mind that's causing that separation in the first place. And at the end of the day, we're all that same energy. And so when I see people who are in a really dark place or spreading negativity or doing this or that, that's just them working on releasing that negativity so that they can come to the light. That's them expressing it and showing it to the surface so it can actually be let go of. And the people who struggle with that, like, are the people that need the most love and need the most light. So if you sit there and point a finger and say, you're wrong, that's wrong, you're bad, then they're going to continue to feel that way, right? But if we can come from a compassionate, understanding, loving place and say, we're all human. I've messed up. You've messed up. We've all messed up. We've all had our moments of not being the best person. And the more we can kind of like have that forgiveness and compassion and awareness, like you talked about, the easier we can help others bridge the path to that unity, that oneness, that divine connection that we all have with one another.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad you brought that up. The part that was irking me the most was not necessarily the negativity that people experience and or emit when they're going through this dark night of the soul, or when they're going through pain, or they don't understand their suffering. But that is such a crucial part of it, isn't it? And that almost becomes the scapegoat for this idea of warfare, of having darkness in the world and having light in this seemingly infinite conflict, right? That has been espoused through mythology, through philosophy, through every story narrative that we really talk about as humans. The part that irritated me was the so-called hashtag woke crowd, who spiritually bypass or totally turn and point the finger at somebody else and say, well, you're not woke enough if you don't see this war that's going on. And it made me chuckle, but then there was something that triggered inside of me that brought up some kind of anger, like, how dare you like muddy the waters with a comment like this? And then had to ask myself, why am I so upset by that? And I think it's, for me personally, it was like, okay, so what is the conflict that I've been having with myself as of recently? And when I asked myself that question, it was definitely evident. I'm going through a new expansion myself, and there is a sort of conflict between um, the shadow pieces that are coming back into my frame of reference, into my awareness, and the extra light that I'm starting to shine in those dark regions, right? So it's kind of the ego saying, "Hey," or telling me, "Hey, there's a conflict, and it's happening exterior, but really the conflict is happening interior." And that was the piece that really stuck out for me when I started to analyze this triggering event, was that this doesn't exist outside of us, right? It's not a spiritual war between, say, Christian believers and New Age believers, or Christian believers and Islamic believers, or Islamic believers and Jewish believers, or atheists and agnostics. It's not like that. This battle is emitted from our core, from who we are and what's going on with us inside, and we see that. So if I guess the point I was seeing was, if you're saying, hey guys, we're fighting this spiritual war, and you found yourself to be this special warrior for God or for the divine, okay, maybe stop projecting that out into the world and trying to get more warriors for God. That concept always made me chuckle. It's like, if God's infinite and omnipotent, he doesn't need you to help with this battle, So
Right.
I
Well, if you're saying like, yeah, I'm woke and you're not, if you don't see this, like that's totally just feeding into the separation that's already happening,
mm,
rather than actually looking at it at your core and saying like, okay, where is this coming from? What's trying to come to the light? What needs to be healed here? And I think people misinterpret like darkness or shadow selves because like they think it's a bad thing. Totally not. It's just a part of you that needs integrated, a part of you that needs healed, and a part of you that needs that compassionate light that's already within you. So if you start to just point the finger and say, I'm woke and you're not, then obviously you're just continuing to where your attention goes, energy flows, right? So if you continue to say you're wrong and I'm right, and we're going to keep thinking that and thinking that and thinking that, I'm continuing to build a bigger and bigger and bigger separation between us, when we're all one. We're all connected, and we all have both that darkness and that light. So I think that's really important that you touched on that. Like, how can we look at that within ourselves and heal that within ourselves, rather than pointing at the other person?
absolutely. It's not an easy thing to do either. Because to a certain extent, we go through these cycles, particularly on the path of spirit, where we heal something and we feel good, right? We feel like, I've done something, I've hit that next level, right? And we keep thinking about this process as linear. And we're like, well, I don't have to go back and I don't have to face that again because I've already done that, right? We're done. We mastered it. We healed it. We're good. Incorrect. That's exactly when you open the door, you kick that door wide open again, and you go, we're going to explore this again, only we're going to go deeper, because
Totally.
each one of these things has a depth to it that we cannot fathom, right? We're talking about healing on a scale that is hard for the ego to understand, right? For our intellect to understand, right? And so, there's two levels of mind. There's the mind that is closer to the divine, to spirit, that kind of acts like a template for our entire existence as this physical manifested being, right? And then there's the mind we develop, that's the persona, that is dealing with the ego, and this is who we think we are in this life, right? And this idea of who we are on this lower level has such a hard time understanding the depth that we have in spirit, or even emotionally speaking. So when we start to heal these things, we think, oh, I'm done, and I'm getting closer and closer and closer. But the real truth, I kind of don't even like the way that came out of my mouth. That sounded gross. The truth of it is, though, the harsh truth, not the real truth, the harsh truth is that we have to continually revisit these things over and over and over again. And so with this idea of expansion that we're talking about this year, I guess the real war is with our understanding of this process that we're going through. The fact that we're not done, that there are points where enough knowledge isn't enough, where we may have mastered some feature or some aspect or some facet of that particular experience, but we might come back around to that and have to face something even darker, even deeper, and that's okay. And I think that's the key here, is that none of us are done. Even the masters, even your Yeshua, your Buddha, your Mikao Usui, pick one, your Yogananda, everybody has more to do. There's no such thing as done.
Yeah. Well, and healing is a journey, not a destination, right? And I love that you brought that up too, because I just had my Reiki 2 class, and it was funny because the first week they were talking about, so after you get a Reiki attunement, whether it be Reiki 1, Reiki 2, Reiki Master, you go through a 21-day cleansing process as you fully expand into that new frequency. And so the first week on our check-in call, a lot of them were like, yeah, I feel like I've already done a lot of the healing. And I was like, just wait. And it was funny because we were just talking about how as you progress, as you learn to have more tools and you expand into a deeper, more encompassing energy, stuff that you thought you healed before will come back up to be healed on a deeper level, to be healed more thoroughly. And then it was funny because then that next week they were all like, oh my gosh, so much came up to be healed that I thought I already healed. But as you continue to walk on the path, as you learn to heal yourself more deeply and more fully, stuff will come up to be reintegrated. And I like that idea too of the shadow self, the dark self, the bad also has to be reintegrated, because we are a perfect balance of dark and light, and we have to find ways to integrate the dark, those lessons, those teachings, to allow us to fully encompass and embody all that we are.
So true. And it brought up something to me. And so I just pulled a card as well from the Mystic Shaman deck. The Wild Woman is an archetype. And I thought that was interesting based on we're talking about this idea of light and darkness. And how there's judgment around some of these terms, right? Without real understanding of what they are. So I thought it was funny that the Wild Woman shows up, which is kind of an element of darkness, the womb, caves, the earth, this kind of cold, wet darkness, which people, kind of perceive nowadays darkness as this negative thing or this attacking force. When in, metaphysically, really, many of the masters and many of the traditions talk about darkness as receptive, right? It's a receptacle, kind of like the womb of a female body. And I think that's fascinating because we have this idea of spiritual warfare, and we have this idea of the light penetrating the darkness, right? This masculine light force, which is penetrative, is really kind of, if we have these two things at ourselves in odds, right? There is a duality with each one of us. None of us are fully feminine or fully masculine. We have bits of both. The real warfare there is that duality. Are we penetrating too much against a force that doesn't want to receive? Or is our reception, flexing outwards and not wanting to receive the light that's coming towards it? It's a dance. It's an interplay between each other, and it requires us to take a step back and analyze some parts of ourselves that's uncomfortable. where we're operating, and also takes a lot of accountability and responsibility. See, and this idea of warfare, right, comes back into mind here. Spirit's talking to me. Um, it's always blame, right? Nobody in the side of a war goes, it's our fault, so we're going to keep fighting. No, everybody goes, no, fuck the other guy. Those guys are bad. We have to fight them until they're gone. And so this idea of spiritual warfare exists on the inner level, and we project it outwards towards everybody else because we don't want to take accountability. We don't want to take responsibility for what we're doing internally.
Yes. I love that so much. One, I wrote down too, like, we kind of talked about this last season too, but I also think like darkness, messiness, pain, the uncomfortable feelings also serve as the greatest portal into healing. If you are perfectly comfortable, you're not going to change a thing. But if you are uncomfortable and you're in pain and you're like, okay, this is not working, that's how you start to bring that light in. That's how you start to shift and heal and change. If you're comfortable, you're never going to change. So we need both the darkness and the light. And so I think it's really important, especially for our listeners, like try to be conscious of the warfare that's going on within you and externally of you, and just be conscious of it without judgment. Though don't attach and say this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad, but rather how can I soften and like combine and merge these energies to fully embody them all, rather than labeling them good and bad, because that's what our ego wants to do. It's easier to say you're wrong and I'm right, but at the end of the day, everything is a reflection of us. So if there's something going on, if there's something that triggers us, like that post triggered you, it's important to look within and say, okay, why is this triggering me? Where is this coming from? And how can I heal it? So actually taking initiative and doing something about it rather than just saying, yep, that's bad, I don't like it, nope, right? Because it's also a portal to help you heal.
Right. And in order for this war to end, right, there has to be concession, compromise, which is funny because I just pulled the giveaway card, which is just an archetype for sacrifice. In order for the wounds to begin to heal, in order for the war to be set aside and for peace to reign, sacrifices have to be made. And this pain that you're talking about, the reason we experience pain or suffering on the path is because we're living in resistance to stuff that we to our purpose, to where our next step is. And it's like when you're carrying too much weight, right? The spirit is asking us, set that down, let it go. That big ball that's been connected to your foot for so many years, that trauma that we've already worked on healing. Okay, we've healed some of it. Now you got to let it go. Okay, that big baggage that you're carrying from that last relationship, and you're like, I want to take this next step. I want to find my next partner who's involved in the spirit as I am. Okay, set down that baggage, put that suitcase down, and get on the train. Okay, we're moving forward. That sacrifice has to happen. We have to let go of the resistance. We have to dissolve. We have to surrender and give away that piece of ourselves in order for the next step to occur, for expansion to truly happen. Because I mean, it's almost like imagine if you slathered, if you were made of light, if you were an energy being made of light, like we all talk about ourselves, right? And now take a bunch of mud that's made from trauma, that's made from pain, that's made from suffering, that's made from persona, which is made from untruths that we've accepted, and you smear that all over that light, right? The process of awakening is kind of like the first step is poking through some of that dried up mud, and then poof, a beam comes out, right? And then after that, the cracks start to form in that mud, right? And we start peeling off pieces that are covering up our form, right? This is expansion. That's expansion. It's letting go of that heavy mud and allowing that lighter light to come forward.
Totally. And I love that image too. That's perfect. One, it's not comfortable. No one said it is. It's not comfortable. But if it was, you wouldn't be changing. You wouldn't be shifting. You wouldn't be evolving. And so I think it's important, like, and I've talked with my Reiki students too about like the idea of, I know for myself, like I struggled with my health growing up. And so it was so easy for me to say, I have anxiety, I have depression, I have OCD, I have conversion disorder. This is what's wrong with me. This is my baggage. It became comfortable because I knew it and I was used to carrying that. So it was comfortable for me. And it was scary to me, be like, okay, so if I set this down, who am I? Because my ego had formed my identity based on all the stuff I was carrying. And so as you're awakening, as you're expanding into your full being, it's not going to be comfortable. But at the end of the day, you have to be willing to set down the things that aren't working, that aren't comfortable, in order to let in more light. Otherwise, you can't, there's no room. Like, we all only have so much energy. So if we're holding on to all of this and that, and it's not comfortable, we have no room to welcome in more of the stuff that actually will fulfill our soul.
That's true. Which it's one of those things that becomes difficult to grasp as we start on the path. You hear there's so much out there. And I think, that kind of plays into a lot more of this spiritual warfare. There's so much information, so much knowledge. And people find communities where they try to fit in and they try to understand. And I see so many people silent, in like comment sections. There's a whole bunch of people who are not so silent, but you see very much more likes or hearts or something like on Facebook, right? And what that tells me is that there's a ton of people who are just searching and they're not willing to speak about it, right? And they're just looking for some piece that's going to help them with this healing process. And with there being so many comments, so many ideas, so many different traditions and systems, it's very difficult to navigate. And that can almost be like a war in the mind. You're like, well, what's right? Which piece is right? And if you haven't developed your own sense of intuition or internal spiritual guidance, wow. I mean, I remember being there, searching through book after book and being like, okay, I don't get this. I don't understand yet. I don't know all the terms. And then maybe you cling to one that sounds right at the time, but then 5 years later, it's no longer right for you. This idea of infinite versus the amount of energy we have is kind of a confusing one that you brought up. We are infinite, co-creative beings capable of way more than we understand, but at the same time, we're very limited and physical, and we have limited energy in the day. Especially if you have kids, you go, wow, where did all my energy go? Right? Right. And it's like, we're talking about this process on a physical level first, where we have limited amount of energy and we commit so much of that energy each day to holding up the beliefs that we have, whether that's, my piece of my depression or my anxiety or my this or my that. Those take up our physical energy, our emotional energy, our etheric energy. And it becomes difficult when you have all those things weighing you down to realize or to remember the fact that you have infinite potential, infinite power to take care of these things. That becomes very difficult. You can't accept what really is a massive truth and the weight that comes with that if you're holding on to everything else. And it's funny, and this is in my own personal gnosis, my own experience. Once you set some of these things down and you start to free up some of that energy, that truth that seemed so massive isn't so heavy. There's accountability, there's responsibility that comes with it for sure, but it's not as heavy as these things that you're carrying now. And that is that in and of itself is kind of this idea of expansion. Is we have to let these things go in order to be able to harness the real power, the infinite power of spirit. And then once you're there's no more war. There's no warfare. Yeah, there's lessons. There's times where you're going to experience some more pain and some more suffering. As long as we're tied to this physical realm, that's going to be a part of the game. But what we can learn and what we can do with this is we can shift our perspective, our awareness in such a way that we can handle it. That we can now look at things differently and go, instead of going, oh no, we're screwed, we can go, oh, I got this. It's going to be difficult, but I got this.